51-year-old Susan Kuhnhausen just finished a shift as an emergency room nurse at the Providence Portland Medical Center and headed to the Perfect Look hair salon. While she waited for her appointment, she picked up an Oprah magazine and read a poem. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear. Susan's father was an Air Force cook and her mother was a homemaker. They divorced when she was in the second grade. Susan spent most of her childhood moving. She moved from Colorado to Arizona, to California and Nevada. She had many different homes and step-parents. She said, I knew my parents loved me, but they couldn't teach me how to have a successful marriage any more than they could teach me how to fly. In the early 80s, Susan moved to Portland, Oregon. She was outgoing and loved to laugh. She went to Harvey's Comedy Club often and would sit in the front row. In 1988, Susan's mother and friend put an ad in the local newspaper, the Willamette Week, for Susan. The ad read, single white female, 33, overweight but not over life, seeks single male who wants more out of a relationship than just slender. Active healthcare professional, enjoys exploring the Northwest, interested in conversation, good times with someone who is intelligent, thoughtful, and full of humor. Must be emotionally, fiscally mature. If you are seeking a bright, funny lady who's adventurous enough to advertise, then please reply. Soon, she got a reply from a man named Mike Kuhnhausen, and within a year, the two were married. When they were dating, Mike told Susan that he was in combat in Vietnam, but Susan later found out that the military records listed him as a switchboard operator. Mike got a job as a janitorial supervisor for Fantasy Adult Video and slowly started to reveal to Susan how unhappy he really was. His catchphrase seemed innocent enough at first, but soon turned into something Susan couldn't stand to hear him say. Life is a shit sandwich, and every day you take another bite until you die. The couple never had any children. Mike would sit around the house and harass Susan whenever she said she was going to go out with some friends. He would get on her about every nickel she spent. Mike chain smoked and was addicted to Diet Coke. After 17 years of marriage, Susan decided she couldn't live like this anymore, and in September of 2005, she kicked Mike out of the house. But Susan never changed the locks or the alarm code. The day was September 6, 2006. After a relaxing hour at the salon, she drove to her blue one-story Cape-style house in Montevilla, a neighborhood in southeast Portland. She saw a note from her husband of 18 years on the microwave in the mudroom. Her husband Mike wrote that he hadn't been sleeping well and that he was going to go to the beach for a few days to relax. He signed the note, L-U-V, me, love me. Susan unlocked the kitchen door and turned off the security alarm. She stepped outside to feel the warm September evening air and flipped through her mail. Susan returned back inside her home and noticed it was unusually dark in her bedroom. She normally draws the curtains in her bedroom in the morning to let the light inside all day. Suddenly, a man jumped out from behind the curtains and began attacking Susan with a claw hammer. The attacker was a man in his 50s, 5'9" and weighed about 190 pounds. He was wearing khaki pants, a blue striped shirt, a blue baseball hat, and yellow rubber gloves. His long, stringy hair was tucked up into the baseball hat. Susan said that at this moment it occurred to her the reason why this random man was in her room. He was there to kill her. Because she was a trained nurse for over 30 years, Susan had an idea of what to do. Most people would run and try to escape the attacker. Susan chose to fight. Susan was an ER nurse and frequently disarmed injured men, helped crack open people's chests for heart surgery, and fought with patients suffering from drug and alcohol withdrawal. She knew from her training that if she stayed close to the attacker, the swings of his weapon would have less force. The attacker got one hard blow to her left temple with the hammer. Susan is 5'4" and a full 5 inches shorter than her attacker and had 2 bad knees. She used her body weight to slam him against a wall, but he didn't fall. "You're strong." Those were the only words she heard from him during the entire encounter. These words sent a rush of adrenaline through Susan. She yelled, "Who sent you?" But the attacker never responded. Instead, he focused on getting his hammer back from Susan. Before he could, Susan grabbed his neck and squeezed as hard as she could. The attacker's face turned purple and then blue. Susan panicked, removed her hands from his neck, and made her run for it. She was trying to escape the house, but he caught up to her. The attacker chased after her and caught her in a narrow hallway. He punched her so hard it split her lip. She fell to the floor. She knew she had one final shot to get him, or else she was going to die that day. Susan managed to pull the man down onto the floor with her. Susan bit on his arm and his thigh. At the time, she thought that teeth marks could be used as possible proof to link this man to her death. She even bit through his zipper at his genitals. She desperately tried to reach into his pockets for something that would ID him and link him to the crime if he were to kill her. By this point, the two had been fighting for 14 minutes. Susan fought for her life. She used her self-defense training. She climbed on top of him and put him in a chokehold. "Tell me who sent you here, and I will call you a ambulance," she yelled. He tried to fight back, but Susan pressed harder, and eventually he stopped moving. Terrified, Susan got off of him and ran to a neighbor's house to call the police. "We have an intruder in the house next door. The intruder was in the bedroom with a hammer. The woman who lives there thinks she may have strangled him. He was down when she left." "Can you put her on the phone?" "She's bleeding." "Does she need an ambulance?" "No, she's a nurse. She says call an ambulance for the guy. He may be dead." So who was this seemingly random man who broke into Susan's home and tried to kill her? The neighbor revealed an important piece of information on the 911 dispatch that night. Dispatcher: "Have there been problems with her ex-husband or her ex-partner?" Neighbor: "She did talk to Mike, her ex-partner, and asked him to house sit for the cats, and he said that he couldn't do it. He was on his way at the beach. He left her a note. He knows the alarm." "Okay, that's good information to pass to the officers." Police responded to Susan 911's call and found the man's body inside her home. In the back pocket was an ID which ID'd him as Mr. Edward Haffey, a 59-year-old Vietnam veteran with a criminal history. The autopsy of Edward Haffey would later show police that he had a near-lethal dose of cocaine in his system that night he attacked Susan in her home. They searched his belongings, which included the yellow rubber gloves, diabetes pills, a wallet, and a daily planner. Inside the daily planner was a note on September 4th that said, "Call Mike." The number listed underneath was Mike Kuhnhausen's phone number. They worked together at the adult video store. Haffey was raised in an upper middle-class home, but recently lived in a trailer on Northeast Killensworth Street in Portland. Investigators dug into his criminal past and they found some shocking information about Haffey. In 1991, Haffey arranged the murder of his ex-girlfriend, 39-year-old Georgia Lee Dutton. He pled guilty on conspiracy to commit aggravated murder charges in 1994 and spent 9 years in the East Oregon Correctional Institution. Haffey was released in November of 2003. He started working at the adult film store about 8 months later when Mike Kuhnhausen hired him to clean the floors. Investigators found that Mike Kuhnhausen drove his gold Dodge Neon to the beach on the day of the attack and checked into the Lincoln City Inn with a credit card. He drove back to Portland on the same night and the next day spent $339 on a Taurus, .357 Magnum revolver at a pawn shop. Mike left a suicide note at his father's house and ran away. On September 13th, police found Mike in a parking garage at the Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center, where he claimed he was trying to check himself in and that he had nothing to live for anymore. The officers put him on an involuntary psychiatric hold, and then 11 hours later, police arrested him for conspiracy to commit murder for charges relating to his wife, Susan Kuhnhausen. Susan filed for divorce the next day. She declared, "If I ever believed you deserved to be dead, I would at least have the balls to kill you myself." Susan and Mike's home in the Montevilla neighborhood in Portland was paid off and worth about $300,000. Mike had lost his job weeks before the attack and had no place to live after she kicked him out. Mike knew that he was no longer listed as a beneficiary on her life insurance policy, but if she died, the house would go to him. Mike Kuhnhausen denied that he had any connection to Edward Haffey. Detectives had employment records that proved the two worked together at the adult film store. Mike changed his story, however, still denying he had anything to do with the attempted death of Susan. "Just because I know the guy doesn't mean I did anything." But detectives had a piece of evidence that would tie Mike to the murder. Detectives noted that there were no signs of forced entry at Susan's house. The only person who knew the security alarm code was Mike. And on the day of the attack, someone had disarmed the security system while Susan was at work. Mike claims this was because he was dropping off the note, not because he was letting Haffey inside the residence. On September 18th, a former cellmate of Edward Haffey told the police that Haffey had asked him to join him in an insurance scam. The cellmate and Haffey met with a man on Southwest 82nd Avenue and Division Street. The man was Mike Kuhnhausen. Mike told the man he would pay him $5,000 to help Haffey kill his wife. The man said no. Mike then had offered Edward Haffey $50,000 to do the hit. On November 17th, another witness told police that he had driven Haffey to meet a man in a parking lot of an Applebee's. The witness said the man they met up with matched the man's picture that had been in the news after Susan's attack. That man was Mike Kuhnhausen. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, and on August 30th, 2007, Michael Kuhnhausen pled guilty to soliciting a murder-for-hire plot. He was sentenced to just 7 years in an Oregon prison. Susan lived in fear for the next few years. She would always make sure to face the door at restaurants and would circle around if she thought someone was following her in her car. She was convinced that Mike was going to come after her when she got out of prison, so she would go to the shooting range for practice. Mike Kuhnhausen had developed cancer and died in prison at the age of 92. This was apparently just days before his release. Until his death, Mike Kuhnhausen never took any responsibility for what he did. He claimed that he pled guilty just to lessen his sentence, and he maintained that he was the victim. Susan Kuhnhausen went on the show I Survived, where she recalled the night of the attack when she knew that she had killed Edward Haffey. I immediately began to think about his family. Everybody has somebody who loves them. Children, a wife, a dad. And worst of this is not that somebody tried to kill me, but that I had to kill someone else to survive. But I have no shame because I did not choose this death for him. I chose my life. I choose life. Susan now goes by Susan Walters and is deeply involved in victim advocacy work. She created a website dedicated to supporting victims of crime in her area. Her site helps victims answer their questions about their justice system. As soon as the office files charges, victims can track their offenders' court dates, sentencing details, and other information regarding the release of the offenders. To this day, Susan still sobs when telling her story, although she says, "When I cry, I feel better." This is truly a sad case. If somebody attacks you, is trying to do something that they're not supposed to be doing to you, you fight like hell. And I think Susan's case is a great example of this. You fight like hell because if you don't take that other person's life, they're going to take yours.